Interesting, yeah, real interested in prisons. I mean, I want to go back to the guy that's in the box. What was his name?
Blue Boy.
And he's in the box for 25 years, you said?
Well, he's been in solitary confinement for most of his prison life. I mean, he had went to jail as a kid and for murdering somebody on the Lower East Side and spent most of his life in the box or in solitary confinement or in segregation of one sort or another. He's one of the most notorious prisoners in the New York State prison system. And the longest he had ever done in population up to that point was 18 months. So he says, you know, you could almost meet anybody in the prison system in the state anyway and ask them if they've ever heard of Blue Boy, and if anybody's done any time, they're almost guaranteed to have heard of Blue Boy. So what do you want to know?
You said that they let him out of population for so many days and he killed somebody?
Well, what happened was, this was a couple of years ago, I had actually visited him upstate, went to Denim, what's it called? What's the name of that prison?
Denim?
Yeah, Denim, upstate, almost way upstate. You have to
Canada, I think.
You have to take a bus at night. You go up to Midtown at 12 o'clock at night. You take a bus, and it starts off going through New Jersey, and then you go up to. Takes you overnight, and you get up there about 8 in the morning. Stops off in Jersey where you can buy all this junk, you know, typical sort of stuff that just would be associated with prisons. Chips, you know, greasy hamburgers, French fries, all just kind of starches and carbohydrates and grease. So anyway, you pack up and all that stuff, and then you spend the night riding the bus till you get upstate. And then you get upstate, you get up there, and then finally you're allowed in close to the prison, to the inside, and that's, you know, it's a typical prison bureaucracy. So you get inside, you have to wait, and then you go up and you give them your driver's license, and then you sit down again, and then they call you up and ask you who you're visiting and who you're going to go see and what's up and all of that. And then eventually you go through all the different forms of being searched, and you get in to see the prisoner. And Blue Boy had, you know, he's a Crip, and he got back into population, and he found out that one of the people that Bernard Goetz had shot was in Shiwanga for rape. So this was one of those prisons where they allowed everybody to mix in the prison yard. So anyway, he took it upon himself. He had his little crew, and they decided who's going to do it. And it was decided that he was going to do it. So he had a shank hidden in the yard. So he went and had the shank hidden, and then he went over to stab this guy. And this black guy with a cane got in the way and hit him in the head, and he stabbed the black guy, I believe, 12 times in the leg and whatever, and it killed him. And that then turned out to be Larry Davis. And Larry Davis was on American Gangster. He's very famous. He was in a case in the late 80s for shooting 6 cops. And what happened was, this was a Bronx jury, and this was a time of, you know, still Ed Koch, and you know, people didn't really trust the police or whatever. So he had Lynn Stewart and William Kunstler as a lawyer. And what happened was is that the jury believed that the cops had come there to kill him because he said that he was dealing drugs for the cops, and something went wrong, and so the cops, he ripped them off or whatever, so they came out to kill him, and so he did a shootout. So he shot his way out and escaped. And then it became this huge lockdown of the Bronx in New York City, trying to find this person who had shot all these cops who had escaped. And it turned out to be Blue Boy. Larry Davis, I'm sorry. And so that's who Blue Boy eventually stabbed and killed in the prison system. And, you know, to a lot of blacks in New York City, Larry Davis was kind of an icon because people believed that he was selling drugs for the police, and they believed that they were coming there to kill him, and they probably were. And this was before Dinkins and the Mullen Commission, and there's no question the cops there was crews in the police department that were dealing drugs, and there's no question Larry Davis was a drug dealer, and it's certainly not impossible that who he was dealing for was the cops. So that's the story. Part of the story.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting story about New York State prison system, corrupt police. You know, and there's Larry Davis. Actually, I was in.
But he made a deal. This guy made a deal. Excuse me.
Yeah, he made a deal with the state because after he killed Larry Davis, you know, it's interesting to know or to speculate whether this Bernard Getz shot and that if the kid that Bernard Getz shot and was in Chihuahua and they were all in the prison yard at the same time and Blue Boy getting into the population, if killing Larry Davis wasn't almost like a plot, because there's a lot of cops that would like to have had Larry Davis get murdered. I mean, there's no question about that. That's just a subtext to the story. But
yes.
Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. Because, you know, he shot 6 cops.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's an old dog that never forgets.
What do you think about Linda, the guy, what was the guy's name that
Dave
shot?
McGonigal?
What's his name?
Dave, I think Dave McGonigal.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you have to remember that was a troubling time in Linda's life, and Linda kind of, you know, was very heavily into this whole sort of gangster idea at the time. You know,
she kept saying I want to be a gangster bitch.
Yeah, I'm a gangster bitch. And, you know, I mean, I don't know what her connection was to the mob or whatever, but she was making chips for casinos, so she had some kind of access to legalized gambling anyway, and those chips were without question real. And she even made chips for the Bushes one time. She got a call from Maine, from George Bush Sr. They wanted some chips. She had a recording on her answering machine, and I heard it. Anyway, so she would be walking around with Dave, and you have to remember, how old would Linda be at that time? 35?
Yes. Walking around with who now? Who is she?
Her boyfriend, Dave McGonigal.
Oh, McGonigal.
So this.
Let me see.
So we were about 35 then, right? This is maybe we were 40.
No, we were 40.
Yeah, so she's probably about 38, 40.
She about 38, I'd say.
Yeah, and so what happened is that so she'd be walking around with Dave, and some guy would come up, a homeless guy, and would ask her for money, and she'd say, "What the fuck's wrong with you?" She'd say, "You should have smacked him. He's not allowed to approach us."
Oh yeah.
So you know, he was only about 21 at the time, so he was heavily influenced by a lot of this behavior and this kind of mentality, and you know. So Dave actually came up to me prior to this whole incident that he was involved in, and he wanted me to try to hook up the drug dealers on First Street with, you know, with the problem, because Linda was fighting with the people upstairs. At this time, she was going through some sort of Linda used to be the most beautiful person in the world, but somehow she was going through some sort of heavy psychological drama, and so she was really fighting with the people upstairs. And in fighting with them, they were like drug dealers on the block. So she'd play the music as loud as you could get and stuff like that. But they didn't want to just come down there and bump off a white woman. And especially somebody who's making chips, because who knows what that's connected to. So it turned into this really kind of like bad and difficult battle. So Dave came over to me and he wanted to me to try to sort of wind this thing down. So it turned out that one of the guys that she was dealing pot with, we're talking about large amounts, I knew, and he was just a Hispanic guy from the neighborhood. And it's also the guy that David was working with. So I went over and talked to Eddie, and I said, "Eddie, you know, we got to calm this thing down, otherwise there's going to be a big problem here." And Eddie sort of, you know, he was arrogant and playing it off and saying, "Oh, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it." I said, I tried to tell him, "Look, this thing is getting serious." So what happens is, just by coincidence, a couple of days later, they're over there in this little silkscreen shop, because that's what Eddie did. He was in a business of sort of sportswear and shirts and all of that community, but he's really into selling pot. And so they were making this deal, I believe it was for $60,000 worth of pot. So they had the $60,000 worth of pot, and Dave was there at the time, and this guy Eddie was there. Eddie, the person I was speaking to, and Dave, the guy that came and spoke to me. So what happened is, and so Dave is wired up now, you gotta remember. And Dave is all paranoid because he's like fighting with these drug dealers upstairs, and instead of we could work this out, Dave is like, he's on high alert. And he's a young kid, he's about 20 years old.
And Linda kept egging him on.
And Linda's always egging him on.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, it turns out these guys come in there to buy these pot, and so they come back in with guns, and all of a sudden, Dave thought it was a stick-up, so he ends up shooting. Now he shot and killed a cop because these were actually cops. Now I'm wondering why wasn't the cop wearing a bulletproof vest, and all these other little details. So it turns out that Dave really got beaten up after that by the cops. Eddie got beaten up by the cops. And there was another guy that worked in the silkscreen shop there, in the t-shirt place. He got beaten up. I mean, we're talking about getting beaten up really badly. So Eddie, if he hadn't been such an arrogant asshole, he wouldn't have ended up getting the beating. David wouldn't be so wired. The whole situation would have been calmed down a lot. And I don't think a cop would have been killed. And David wouldn't be running around with a gun. So, he ended up getting, I'm sure, life in jail without parole for shooting a cop. Now, you know that any time he comes up for parole, that the cop's wife or cousin or aunt or somebody and other cops are going to be there, and he's not going to get out.
I thought he was out. I thought that.
I don't think so.
I thought that I thought that it was a dirty deal.
Well, he went to jail. Do I think it was a dirty deal? Well, who cares if it was a dirty deal or not?
Well, I don't think the cops went to his trial.
Oh no, he got sentenced.
Yes, but I was told, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but the cops never made some show at his trial.
Well, that part I don't know.
Like normally they have like 60 guys there.
Well, I believe he got life.
I believe he got 20 years.
Oh, you might be
18
right.
years.
Maybe he got 18 to 20 years.
He could be
sure.
out now.
Well, if that's true, you could be right. But I'll tell you the other part of the story is from my perspective, and that is he didn't have a St. Patrick's Day funeral. And the cops from the 9th, they just put up a little wreath above the scene where it happened. And a little while after that, they were doing a cop show in that space. They were renting that space out for a cop show, a TV show, and they were using the fire escape. Now you tell me, with all the buildings and spaces there are in New York City, why they would ever rent out that space for a TV show not that long after. You know what I'm saying? That's like a total desecration. I mean, nobody would do that. The mob wouldn't do that. Who would do that? Rent out a space so somebody could make a stupid TV show? Nobody.
And where one of your comrades was killed, you mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's like you talk about paintings having a certain life and vitality to them, and you shoot just somewhere where a cop gets killed. That's still sort of hallowed ground, even if you hate the guy.
Yeah, there was a memorial there for the longest time.
No, there wasn't, and
Oh.
and that makes you. That's what made me wonder. And there was no big St. Patrick's Day funeral. I think there was a little funeral in Staten Island.
Mm-hmm.
So if he actually got killed in the line of duty, which not that many cops do.
That's right.
Usually there's you got 5,000 cops from all over the country. Everybody comes to the
What's that
funeral.
noise?
I don't know. Let's see.
Sounds like the dog.
Yeah, maybe you can go upstairs
Open the
and
door.
tend to the dogs for a minute. To first check the door. But
Open the door.
that's that I found questionable, because any cop that gets killed in the line of duty,
What's going on here?
whether it be in Ferguson or whether it be in L.A. or wherever it is, cops from all over the country, it's that kind of brotherhood where they all show up.
Yeah.
So the fact that they had a little, no St. Patrick's Day and they had a little funeral in Staten Island indicated to me that there wasn't a lot of, I don't want to say sorrow. I mean, he was still a cop. Dirty or not, he was still a cop. So you can't get past shooting a cop. But so, okay, maybe he got 20 years. I'm not sure in the end. I mean, at that time, I certainly wasn't involved in going to the trial. I did my part to alleviate that situation that existed. And the fact that they didn't do anything about it is their stupidity. And he paid the price. Eddie wants to be arrogant. Well, okay, here's what your arrogance got you. In the end, it got you a real serious kick in the ass. I mean, they beat these people up bad. Then detectives went to the hospital and beat him up again. Just because he shot a cop, not because they liked the cop.
Yeah.
It's just, that's one of our boys and you shot him, and even if we think he's a scumbag, you don't have the right to shoot him. And there were a lot of dubious things about that. I mean, it just was not that romanticized, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's quite possible no cops went to court. I don't know. That part I didn't know. Who told you that?
I don't know. Maybe I made it up. I don't know, but I think it's true. I think it's true. I don't know if it's something that I observed in my own imagination,
Well,
or
I'm
something
sure
told
there's
me. But
probably a record of it somewhere on the internet. There should be anyway.
But I mean,
there's no park or there's no street over there named after him. Let's put it to you that way.
yeah,
There's nothing. It's not that there's no Andrew Glover program developed around this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's no after-school program with this cop's name on it. There's nothing that indicate that cop was murdered or killed or shot And there's people, without question, believe that it was just a ripoff. And was it a ripoff? Could have been. And I don't think Dave would have just shot a cop.
yeah,
Nobody, I don't care who you are, John Gotti or whoever, shooting a cop is not something that's first on the list. For all that bullshit about all these people that talk about hating cops, there's very few people will shoot a cop. It's just one of those things,
yeah. They're working stiffs like the rest of us when it comes down to it.
Well, there's that, although they have a lot of power.